Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is part 18 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's book, Essential Philosophy. And last time we were dealing a lot with free will and determinism, and we keep talking about that in the next chapter called Determinism and Emergent Properties. And I understand that he thinks, and for good reasons, of course, right, that free will is a very pivotal point in philosophy because it's sort of a on-off switch for talking about ethics. If you're determined, if you are set on determinism, it's sort of contradictory to argue for acting in a certain way, because you can't ask people to act in a certain way if everything is determined. But it's just not, as I pointed out, it doesn't seem to be the way that things work, right? You can go over to a cow and shove a gun in its face and say, produce some more milk, and it'll just say moo and eating, chewing on its grass, right? But if you do that to a human being, you could say, well, give me your fucking money, right? And there's a good chance that that individual will give you his or her money, whatever they have in their pocket, or their jewelry or whatever, right? So there seems to be something going on that is inexplicable in science. You can't explain this using science, right? And I don't know why there isn't in a similar fashion as the hard problem of consciousness, there should be the hard problem of ethics, right? You understand where I'm going? It's like, or the hard problem of, I know I can die, right? I know I can die. I have an understanding that I could possibly die, right? But you could say, well, I don't know it before I know it. No, I don't know I'm going to die before I'm dying or dead, and then I can't know it. But, But you don't want to take the chance, just like in when Neanderthals were sitting in the grass, or maybe that would be some other pre-human race. But the pre-humanoids, they were sitting in the tall grass, and then they heard the sort of the purr of a tiger, or the roar of a tiger somewhere. Then they wouldn't want to go to get. I'm not saying they heard the tiger. I'm not saying they knew that they know that is a tiger. But they have a sound. They are very concerned, might refer to an object that usually produced that sound, and that object would be a tiger. So what's your options in that situation? You can go and figure out whether it's a tiger, but that might lead you to need to go so close that you're going to be eaten, right? So you don't want to know if it's a tiger. You want to get away and say, well, I heard a tiger, right? So this is sort of how, in my opinion, this kind of storytelling of human beings to sort of create a sort of common reality of what is going on, right? Because there is a coherence in agreeing on what is going on if I'm the only one knowing there's a tiger, the next guy might actually run into that tiger tomorrow, right? So I want to tell the other guys in the clan that, wait, I heard a tiger, right? So they have that sort of quote information. But I never saw any tiger. I didn't recognize a tiger. I heard the sound which I correlate with a tiger. So these stories sort of keep appearing, right? And the same is that, well, I have the story that I'm going to die at some point, right? And if that gun is something that can make that death appear, right? So I'm aware of that. But a cow is not aware of that. So I think that human action is built on the idea that you can die, right? If you didn't know that you could die, you wouldn't care too much about your actions. And the line between living and dying can be very minuscule, right? If you're walking a tightrope or something like that, that's not an everyday situation. But if you're riding a bicycle, if you adjust your, steer a little to the left, you will slowly go out into the middle of the road and might be hit by a car, right? but it's just a very small adjustment that is the matter of life or death, right? So also in free will, in my opinion, we have compared to our imagination. I can imagine unicorns and riding on 5 unicorns through the universe, landing on Mars or something like that, right? I can imagine that, right? Fine, no problem. I can imagine. I can, screw with the concepts and ideas of how the laws, so-called laws of the universe works and so on. But it doesn't mean I can do it just because I can imagine it, right? But it takes some imagination to figure out what you can actually do, right? So there's some famous guy, I don't remember who said, well, in attempting to do the impossible, you reach the limit of what is possible. So the human imagination is sort of, in a way you could say, constantly stretching ideas of what you can do in order to actually figure out, well, before I thought this was impossible, but now I can actually fly. I can actually create in a machine. I can put my ass in and then, get into the air, right? There was a dream of Leonardo da Vinci and all sorts of people, and, and then it's possible. Nobody thought it would be possible, right? Or going to the moon is like ridiculous. Now, I'm not one of those who believe in that story, but that's another. Let's just say that somebody went to the moon, right? That's at least in low Earth orbit rocket, right? Satellites and, looking down at the Earth and see the shape of Earth and so on, right? These things are kind of, it's that stretching of possibilities that where you need to, you don't want to be able to stretch your abilities unless you have some kind of adjustment of it. But it's all circumstantial. It's not a proof of anything, right? You can't get to a proof, quote, of free will, because it's something that is, I can't even get a proof of my own free will, right? I can only say something is going on that is inexplainable by science, right? And first of all, it always comes back to the hard problem of consciousness. Science can't even tell me why I'm supposed to have the sensation of red, for instance, or the taste of a pancake or something like that. Where does that taste come from? That's an atom or an electron or the spin up and down of quarks or whatever. There's nothing in that says that it has to be the taste of pancake, right? It's merely correlations. There's nothing that says it has to be this way because, right? But that's what science does about what we call reality. It says because this rock is there and the earth is there, it moves because the earth is there, the rock will fall to earth, right? There's nothing else. There's not a taste of gravity we have to explain. But observing the stuff is, colors and tastes and sounds and so on. As there's nothing in that scientific description. So I would say if you can't get through the hard problem of consciousness, how can you even attempt to refute free will, which is purely subjective, right? So it's like, come on, man, right? And there's some guy like Sam Harris, who has written books about determinism, or called free will, but he's determined, right? And arguing for scientific morality or something like that in the moral landscape. He's basically he's a very, very lousy philosopher, right? Just read his book to get an idea of how bad he is at arguing, right? And then when he talks about morality, it's like he's telling everybody how he thinks people should act. He's a determinist, and then he's telling people this should happen and this should happen, and in the future, if somebody does this, somebody else should come and grab them or put them in jail or whatever. But how can he do that if he's a determinist, right? It's so moronic. It's ridiculous, right? He doesn't even understand the contradictory nature of his philosophy. So I would say that free will is an axiomatic thing. There's no way around it. If you don't agree with free will, in some sense or another, right? There's sort of three camps in free will. There are the determinists. There are the libertarian free will, which are those who says that there's basically unlimited free will. There's no limitation to free will. And then there are the compatibilists, so who says, yeah, there's some free will, but mostly it's determined or something like that. And I'm not even sure, but this is typical academic approach, right? Then we create three camps, and then you have to choose, right? It's so stupid. It's actually encumbering good philosophy, these kind of, and metaethics is a giant example of this, right? You have to be either a realist or non-realist. No, you have to work from your reduction base, your first principles. That's where you go to get your fucking philosophy, always. If you don't, you can't trust that philosopher. If there isn't a very strict and easily approachable first principle or reduction base, or whatever you want to call it, and you're not even sure if there's a consensus of how to describe these things, right? Then you should approach it as pretty lousy philosophy, right? There might be good thinking in it, but it's not based on anything, right? So it might as well be wrong, right? And if you do not have a reduction base or first principle you work from, right? And you state them clearly, these are this is the reduction base I'm working from. It is cut in stone, right? It's like, this is what I'm working from, right? And everything can be traced back to that reduction base. It doesn't work, right? Nobody in 500 years is going to take it seriously. It's just out of the question, right? And Stefan Molyneux is an eclatant example of this. He's just cherry picking certain aspects that he can argue against and leaving the rest alone. Excuse me. So, okay, this little rant, there were a few highlights in the previous chapter, but I don't think it's worth delving too much. I have said what I need to say, my opinion or my philosophy around these things. And again, you'll have to approach it limiting yourself from your metaphysics. You can't violate your own philosophy to get ahead in the next philosophy, right? You have to stick to your guns, so to say. You have to stick to your axioms of what you're working from, and don't take any. If you're going to bring in something new, you have to make an axiom, right? It's just the way it is. There's no way around it. Otherwise, it's stupid philosophy, basically, right? You're just farting in the wind or connecting the dots according to the agenda, in the direction. You're just creating dots to get from A to B, like, you know, bridging Hume's Isard gap. I'm just going to make some hand waving and then I bridge the gap, right? That's stupid. That's not how you do good philosophy, right? And maybe there's also one thing, and I'm deeply empathetic to that. That academia has been corrupted, right? I mean, it's obvious. It's obvious. They're not going to arrive at any moral principle soon, right? Because they know that they're basing most of what they're doing on the liberties they get from the state, the government taxing the population, right? If there weren't taxation of the population, most of those philosophers who work in academia wouldn't work there. Because they would have to make some kind of value for what they get. Nobody would pay someone to walk around thinking about consciousness for 20 years, right? What the hell would you... But I have my own consciousness, right? And, you know, I can deal with my own consciousness. I don't need you to tell me how to deal with my consciousness, right? And if I did need you, what makes you so fucking special, right? So, and they are wedded to their philosophy, so they avoid getting out in the real world doing manual labor, so to say, right? To put it short. So they are corrupted because they want to have these nice professorships and you know, tenure and academia, go to interesting places and to interesting forums or discussions or TED Talks and writing books and have a nice time and, getting locked down for 2 years and sitting at home and, doing nothing, getting paid for it, right? That's what they want to do. They don't want to say, well, this is a solution. Well, we have figured everything out in philosophy. This is how it is, right? This is how you do it. They're not going to do that because then they're fucking shooting themselves in the foot. They are losing their job, right? Then they're sort of handing over the debates to the population of the world and saying, this is how it is. So you don't need us anymore because now we figured it out. No, they're never going to figure it out, right? They're never going to. And there's sort of a gatekeeping of those who are dependent on academia. They're making sure that those who get anywhere in philosophy are those who are so confused that they're not going to get anywhere in philosophy. They're getting pushed upwards, right? While those who are critical and can think for themselves and actually progress in philosophy, they're kept out, right? I mean, it's obvious. Come on, man, right? There's billions almost of philosophers in the last 150 years, and no one seems to have created something even remotely cohesive and useful, right? Everybody's just more confused. Okay. With that rant out of the way, I'm heading into determinism and emergent properties. This is also a kind of bad writing, right? Determinism, emergent properties. What are emergent properties? He's just, slapping it in your face as if he pretends it's so obvious what he's talking about, right? And then he is grooming you into thinking that you're supposed to talk about emergent properties because he states it. But what the hell are they? But it's like he is conditioning you to taking it seriously because it's a part of the headline of the chapter, right? The title of the chapter. So it's not, I don't like this. Now we are talking about this, and then the explanation comes, right? I philosophize and then draw some kind of conclusion and then label it as something, right? If you never heard about a bicycle, then say, I'm going to talk about bicycles. And then people say, what's that? Okay, but then you could sort of tell them anything you want, basically, right? If there isn't actually a bicycle you can point to and show how it works and so on, right? So instead the approach should be, well, you're talking one step at a time from your reduction base or wherever you are in your chain of reasoning from way back from the reduction base, right? And the next point I think is this and this and then this, and then I'm arriving at this kind of conclusion, and that's what I call emergent properties, right? So you're carrying your reader along and sort of saying, yeah, that makes sense. But you're saying emergent properties and said, okay, what the hell is that, right? So you're confusing the reader more than you are helping. And I would say that's possibly either a sign that you are not really sensitive to how people are reading, but you're also kind of bitch slapping people into submission some in some way or another, right? Reducing objects to their material properties is truly a reduction to absurdity. Okay. Wood is partly composed of carbon atoms. Yeah, but the point is he doesn't understand that you can't reduce to atoms, right? Because you don't experience atoms, in my opinion. That you're stretching your reduction base too far. You can say your reduction base goes down, then you have your experience. But your experience can be used, the objectification of your experience can be used for large scopes like the universe, solar system, or infinitesimal sizes like atoms. But these are very hard to objectify because the human mind has not been trained to objectify these things. We have not been working in a atomic or subatomic world all through our evolution. We are used to walking around it in macro reality, let's say, right? That's how we are used to objectify things. When we blow it up with a microscope, we are suddenly using that macro objectification to objectify atomic sizes. And I think that's why that quantum mechanics is so confusing, because it doesn't make any normal sense in the way it works, because we are not used to objectifying what is going on down there, right? And also the larger sizes, like, relativity and all this, the mind is not, the objectification of our experience is stretched to its limits or beyond its limits, right? So when you're going down on atomic level, you're blowing it way bigger than, or smaller, you could say, than the human mind is functioning, the level it's functioning at. And therefore, I would stay with experience as the reduction, because also that's what you can talk about, right? You can talk about the experience of red, and whether or not it's red, or whether or not it's an elephant, and so on, right? But you can't discuss whether or not it's an atom, right? You're pointing out in reality to say, okay, that's an atom. No, you don't work that way, right? Yeah, atoms is a fine model for what is going on down there, right? I'm educated in chemistry, for God's sake, right? I worked with chemistry for more than 30 years, on and off, let's say, right? I understand how useful it is, but it doesn't mean I am experiencing carbon atoms and so on, right? I'm not. It's not like, and even if you try to experience it with your senses, it would be like some kind of little pattern. If you blow it up with electronic microscope, you will see some little bubbles or something like that. And you would point to say, that's just a pattern. It doesn't say that it's a carbon atom, right? It's a model. It's a model of what is going on. And as long as the model is not contradicted by experiments which are set up to refute or whatever, right? Then the model holds, right? So, and maybe that's also a problem with science, is that if you can't refute a theory or a model, it's kind of valid. But I'm not sure that's a good idea in knowledge. Knowledge is, if you don't experience it, you don't know it, right? So that's my approach to knowledge. And I think there's a contradiction, or there's a methodological problem in these two things. If a theory can't be rejected, it must hold, right? That's the general induction of Francis Bacon, I would say. But if you don't have experience, you don't have knowledge. So they can possibly work together, but there might be a problem there. Maybe it's the intuitive understanding. If you can't refute it, it must be the case, right? So if you can't refute it, it must be knowledge. But that's the problem with knowledge. That doesn't work. It doesn't work that way, in my opinion, right? Okay. Wood is partly composed of carbon atom, and tables are made of wood. Thus, because I cannot put my plate on a carbon atom, I cannot put my plate on a table either. Atoms are mostly space, therefore I can walk through a wall. Carbon is the basis of life. However, no carbon atom can be alive. Therefore, there is no such thing as life. Carbon atoms are found in dead things and inert things, as well as in living things. Therefore, there is no difference between dead things, inert things, and living things. No individual player can win against a professor. He likes to bring in examples that makes it sound like he is arguing, but it's kind of annoying, all these. Why don't you just use one example and then get on with it, right? I'm getting there's a very high risk I'm getting lost in these 4 or 5 examples of basically the same argument, right? Just use one argument and I got it, right? You only need to say it once, like, James Cameron. You don't need to pound he says, when you're making movies as a director, you don't need to pound in the understanding of a point, right? Yeah, okay, we got it. This is the bad guy, this is the good guy. We got it, okay, right? You don't need to pound on it, right? Just use an example. The viewer is sufficiently clever to understand this is the good, this is the bad. And it might even be interesting to bring in your own thinking instead of pounding the point into people as if they can't understand unless you pound it 5 times, right? Okay. No individual metal cannot float, therefore a ship made of metal cannot float. You get the idea. Life is an emergent property of matter. Is that just a claim? If you get enough particular kinds of matter together with the right configuration, that's a kind of, isn't that a panpsychist notion? But life is not mind, no, so it's not, it's a kind of, if you bring the right atoms together, life will appear. Oh, then he will run into the hard problem of consciousness, right? Of energy, you get life. Yeah, but you're just, it's a circular argument, right? Because this one has life, I will define this as life, and if you bring things together like this, you have life. So now I am argued for life. No, it doesn't work that way. It's just a bad argument, right? A pregnant woman is a wonderful mechanism for converting celery into consciousness. A pregnant woman is a wonderful mechanism for converting celery into consciousness. Is there something I know about the pregnant women, that they are they hunger for celery? It's just, and I don't like these sort of clever, some black humor kind of notions. I'm all for humor. I like humor. I mean, I'm a big Monty Python fan, and I like all sorts of humor, right? But I understanding when it's there's a Danish guy who has a good sentence in this regard. I just remember it, or forget it. It's knowing when to do something and not to do. When it's a good thing to do it, and this is a place where it's not so good thing to do this, right? It's knowing when something is, what's the word I'm looking for? Is fitting, is right. In hardcore philosophy, I wouldn't use humor, right? I would avoid it at all costs, because I would basically be shooting my own foot, right? If I need to make a humorous notion, it feels like I'm trying to manipulate the audience, right? The reader. Rather than making sure that they understand what I'm talking about, right? So I would never use humor in philosophy, never. It might depend on what we're dealing with, right? If you're talking about a book like The Art of the Argument, yes, I would say we are so far removed from, most of the time, from hardcore philosophy, and talking about more like everyday, conversations and so on, right? So yeah, humor might be in place here and there, right? But sparsely, but not when we're dealing with understanding of the core elements in philosophy, right? I wouldn't do it, right? But that's my opinion, right? So atoms in a piece of celery end up among the atoms of a growing brain, where, in conjunction with a wide variety of other factors, they achieve consciousness. But how do you know that consciousness arrives from the brain? You don't know that. Because, for one simple freaking reason, you need to understand. And this is why you're running into so many problems in your philosophy. The brain is a result of your experience. Your experience is not a result of your brain, right? You only have an idea of brain because you have an experience. So the experience comes before the brain. You understand what I mean? Yeah, you can say, when I look at my whole reality, my experience, I can experience brain, and my experience must be inside that brain. Yeah, but the brain is still an objectification of an experience. It can't be the other way around, because there's no connection there, right? You have to have the experience first to get to any idea of brain. So what you're experiencing is not that which is actually there, because you have to have an experience of it first, right? So whatever is having that experience is something that you do not have access to, but what you call brain is your mind's attempt to describe that which does not know what is, right? So if this sounds crazy, it's because the penny hasn't dropped for you yet about how this mind thing works without creating all sorts of problems like the hard problem of consciousness, right? Brain is a result of experience. It can't be any other way, right? You have to experience it in order to have any idea of it, right? So if you have to experience it first, you can't say that experience is a part of your brain, right? You see where I'm getting? You can't say that. You can say it, but it's incorrect. You can say it may not exactly be incorrect, but it's a violation of the understanding, because you need your experience to have an idea of brain. Then you can't just turn it around and say the experience arrives from this brain. You can't do that. You can at most say, which is my approach to idealism, right? Is that the brain is how I experience, how I objectify that which the experience or is presented in from an experiential point of view. I have to have the experience, but if the experience is living inside the brain, then I can't say that the experience arises from the brain, because I have to have the experience in order to understand there is a brain, right? I can't switch them around. I can't take that brain that is experienced or objectified after the experience and put it in front of the experience, right? Because it's behind the experience. It has to be experienced before I have an idea of it. Then I can't move it back behind the experience and say it arises from this brain. Oh. It's difficult to explain. So when the penny drops, all these words I'm saying makes perfectly sense. But if the idealist penny hasn't dropped for you yet, it might sound completely ridiculous, right? And I think that's one of the problems that a guy like Immanuel Kant had. So he invented all sorts of, the noumena and the whatever, all sorts of things to try to articulate this understanding. But maybe he only made it worse. He invented new stuff. There's a new realm called the noumena. What the hell is that, right? Is that Plato's cave, or what are we talking about, right? Okay. No individual celery atom gains consciousness, of course, and no celery is conscious, but through the process of a woman's pregnancy, each atom in the food she consumes contributes to the consciousness. Atoms and food and celery and individuals and women and whatever, they are all experiential stuff, right? They are not on the other side of experience. So if they're not on the other side of experience, how does you are just saying, well, whatever the mind creates and objectifies, that is that which is on the other side, right? But if that is which is on the other side and you have access to that, why the hell would you need the experience then? With the risk of being wrong. As you have pointed out, you could be in error, right? So you don't know what is on the other side of experience, right? You merely have experientially objectified stuff, which is just sort of, I don't know, you could call it arbitrary, right? It works. I'm not saying it doesn't work. But you can't say that is exactly what is on the other side, which is what you implicitly are saying by referring to it as being on the other side of your experience. Okay. No individual atom is alive. And that is why we get into all these sort of weird notions in this no individual atom is alive. What the hell do you know, right? No individual atom or cell is conscious, yet consciousness exists. Consciousness exists. Well, if you're saying, I'm experienced elephant, that elephant exists, but that elephant is a part of my experience, right? And I'm conscious of the elephant, so now my consciousness of that elephant also exists. So existence determines existence, or something like that, right? Can you see how crazy this is? If you deconstruct what he's saying. Consciousness exists. It doesn't exist. There is, I would say, consciousness is your awareness of the objectification. I'm aware that's an elephant, right? And I would even say that you wouldn't have objectifications like elephant if you couldn't be aware of that elephant. And the awareness is you're bringing in your emotional apparatus to have a reaction of some kind to that object. Okay. No life exists in the absence of atoms, yet no individual atom is alive. I'm not going into that. That's just sort of misunderstood elaborations based on faulty metaphysics, right? No consciousness exists in the absence of atoms, yet no individual atom is conscious. Okay, that sounds weird, right? So where is it? What the hell is it, right? If it exists, why the hell is it? Remove one individual atom from a life form and it continues to live. He's also, maybe I'm misguided, but it sounds like he's equating consciousness and life. I'm not sure that's a decent thing to do. It's you're equating the terms that are describing way different stuff, right? So, okay. Remove one individual. It's also in this place, in this situation, I feel so removed from what he's talking about here that I'm actually having a hard time attempting to deconstruct it, because I have to almost say, well, it is wrong. This is my philosophy, right? And that wouldn't be quite fair, right? So I'm just going to sort of leave it hanging until further, right? Remove one individual atom from a life form and it continues to live. Remove one individual atom from a brain, consciousness continues. What? Remove enough up to some biochemical tipping point, and both life and consciousness cease to exist, to be. Thus, life is an emergent property. Is it? He's equating life and consciousness, isn't he? I don't think that's a good idea, mate, right? So consciousness emerges, and that is also life. I'm just misunderstanding. It's just very confusing, right? And you trust me, you do not want confusion in your philosophy. It should be very clear as can possibly be, right? It's not you're talking about life, and then you're talking about consciousness, and then you're talking about life, and then you're talking about consciousness. That means you are equating the term life and consciousness and confusing people of what you're talking about, right? None of its individual components possess it, yet in combination life comes into being. Consciousness is also an emergent property. Okay, so he is distinguishing them. None of its individual components possess it, yet in their combination we start to think. Life and consciousness are shared by a wide variety of other creatures. But free will, how the hell does he know? I mean, at least about consciousness, right? It's a zombie problem, the problem of other minds, however you want to put it. But free will is a uniquely human phenomenon. You can't just argue, well, this is the case, so now I argue it, right? I mean, you have to have a critical, skeptical stance towards it and say, I can't just, boast this. That's why there are skeptics. But actually, I would say skeptics are the real philosophers. Those who just, this is the case, they're bad philosophers, right? They're the one labeling people as skeptics. It's the skeptics who are the real philosophers, and those who just jump over gaps, just like by saying, this is the case, they're the bad philosophers, right? Life and consciousness are shared by a wide variety of other creatures, but free will is a uniquely human phenomenon. Is it? How the hell does he know about this? It's ridiculous. No other organism that we know of. We? What's we? Do you know what everybody else knows? You have a complete overview of, 8 billion individuals' knowledge of... it's ridiculous, right? No other organism that we know of can consciously compare proposed actions to ideal abstract standards. So it must be, I must treat this as an axiom, right? I must treat it as an axiom. This is an axiomatic approach. That's how I would see it, right? but it's not clear that he's working from an axiom, right? It's just like he states it like it's obvious, but it's not obvious, right? So it must be treated as an axiom. You must treat it as an axiom. Accepting that life and consciousness are emergent properties of matter and energy, but denying free will on the basis of physics is a ridiculous self-contradictory position. No carbon atom can comprehend science, yet human beings can, using a discipline that is itself an emergent property to deny the existence of an emergent property, such as free will, is beyond foolish. No carbon atom can walk, eat, reproduce, or die, yet carbon-based life forms exhibit all these characteristics. No individual atom can see what our eyes can see. No individual atom can get... Yeah, but instead all these things you're referring to are on the other side of experience. They are not the things that they are placeholders for what might be going on out there, right? That eventually turns into an experience that you objectify as all these things, right? Atoms and, life forms and whatever. To make an error, we must be alive and conscious. To deny emergent properties is to deny the very capacities that give rise to our ability to get arguments so spectacularly wrong. Please understand that this is not definitive proof of free will. Okay, I'm happy that he says that, right? That's at least a good understanding of his what is possible with free will, right? However, it is a strong repudiation of the idea that we can judge consciousness on the basis of merely material components. Well, yeah, to cut it short, right? You can settle up none of them, right? Neither determinism or free will. You can't, or compatibilism, whatever, right? You can't refute any of them. So we are in a situation where I would say the principle of the worst case is applicable. Where you say, okay, so let's say that what's worse, people do not have free will but believe in it, or they have free will and not believe in it. There are two more, but let's take those two, right? Well, it is that they actually have free will, right? However, whatever they actually believe, right? If they have free will, they will act in some kind of, potentially in some kind of egotistical manner, that they can sort of get more than they actually deserve from some interaction, because they have a will that can conform to what they believe is more advantageous, which is rationalization, right? And that might mean that you get less than you thought you would get, right? So if you can't prove it, you need to go with the worst case, in my opinion, right? And that is that people have free will, so that you could get more than you deserve, but you could also get less than you deserve, so to say, right? And that's what, if there's determinism, you get what you deserve, right? No matter what. But if I'm I'm believing in that I have some kind of free will, I have to take that into consideration, right? Because I'm sort of in a situation I cannot possibly function unless I work from the idea of free will. Even those who claim determinist position, they are, in my opinion, acting. I have to consider them acting from some kind of free will. So, in my opinion, it is completely, it's dangerous to consider there's no free will. Because then if there is free will and you don't believe in it, you're going to get screwed, right? Okay. While it is true that all atoms are subject to the iron laws of physics, this does not tell us anything about their capacities under emergent properties. Carbon atom cannot initiate no individual atom, reducing complexities and consciousness, life, and free will to mere empty materialism is ridiculous. Well, this ridiculous is not really an argument, right? It's ridiculous. Right? When I deconstruct this, I can use terms like that, right? Because I'm not writing a book where I have long time to elaborate and my limitation of my English and so on, right? Which is my second language. So, but is ridiculous is not a powerful argument, right? It just isn't. That's just how it is, right? And an intellectual embarrassment, to be perfectly frank. Perfectly frank. To see how ridiculous this position is, all you need to do is remember this basic fact. No individual atom can possess a theory of determinism. Therefore, no theory of determinism exists. But no individual atom can possess a theory of, free will. So therefore, no free will exists. I mean, you also this about existence. It's not something that exists in any understanding of that word. What can be objectified within my experience is that which can exist, right? Elephant is what I can only claim to exist, right? I having an idea of my free will is not something that exists because the free will is something that is in me. It's not something that exists like when I'm pointing to an elephant and saying, that's an elephant, right? I'm not pointing to free will and saying that's a free will, right? I can't do that. So you're mixing the terms here. And isn't there a more sort of important term in metaphysics than existence? And confusing the idea of existence is a huge problem. Just think of it, right? If you wish to argue against the proposition that free will can be an emergent property of consciousness, specifically human consciousness, you are more than welcome to do that. But then you need to explain why free will is different from life or consciousness itself. Both life and consciousness are emergent properties of matter. No, they are not. Because matter is your objectification, or even your abstractions of your objectifications of reality, right? So they are not emergent from that. They emerge they are arrived upon from your experience of whatever it is that's going out in there in the noumena, as Kant would say, right? That which you do not have access to. So it creeps up everywhere. Problems from arriving from this misconception or misunderstanding of metaphysics, right? So you already accept that new properties emerge from aggregation. I don't. You cannot then draw some imaginary line in the sand and say, well, life and consciousness are emergent properties that possess characteristics that none of their individual components possess. But free will must be judged outside the bounds of emergent properties and can never be justified because no individual atom in the human mind possesses free will. You cannot have it both ways. If you accept the emergent properties of life and consciousness, you cannot then arbitrarily deny the emergent. No, from that standpoint of emergent, but there's nothing that is emergent. That's the problem of metaphysics. You can't talk about emergent because your experience is there without an explanation of why they're there. And everything you have access to is derived from your experience, right? So you're sitting at that cinema screen, and you have no way of getting to what goes on in that screen. It's maybe a bad analogy because then there's the projector room, and I know about that. Yeah, but you don't know about any projector room, right? Because it's a one-way street where it comes from the outside, right? That's what you would say. Or, an outside is also an axiomatic stance, right? The outside is an interpretation of your experience. But then you just say, well, I have the experience, right? Then you have to roll back and say, I have experience. So you're left with your experience. And then you draw from there. But then the experience becomes the first deepest level you can get to. You can't get further, right? You can't have experience before experience. And if you could experience that, let's say that, but then we're just moving the goalpost of where you have experience. So you're an experience machine, you're not an existence machine, right? Okay. The next chapter is a hypothesis of determinism. I will see how long that is. Self-knowledge versus determinism. This very, very long chapter, this. Holy shit. Determinism. Holy frick. Morality. Okay, so we are going from free will and determinism right into morality. Well, oh, holy shit. Okay, let's see how far I can get. I thought I would be done pretty soon with determinism. Apparently not. All this is elementary logic, not particularly if it's logic, but the premises are not good, right? So why is the deterministic position so prevalent? It would be silly to watch a biologist denying the existence of life, or a psychologist denying the existence of consciousness, or actually, I think I'm going to pass through this determinism thing. That cannot possibly. It has to be some kind of, word salad. This rather than, I think I've said what I need to say, and this is, for self-study. So determinism and a history of evil. Okay, so he's possibly, I'm taking a wild stab at this, right? Talking about all those who are believing in determinism and how they are taking advantage of that and, rolling out their evil and so on, possibly, right? Okay. Good and evil. Good and evil has nothing to do in the discussion of free will and determinism, in my opinion. It's ridiculous, right? Determinism, emotional investment. Right? Instead of talking about how great his own philosophy is, he's sort of downgrading the other camp, right? Talking about how bad the other camp is, and thereby sort of sophistically improving his own camp, sort of by manipulating you, right? I don't like that. That's bad philosophy. If it is at all philosophy and not just pure sophistry, right? Okay, so the next chapter will be morality and the elements, and I will take that in part. How far did we get? Part 18, this one. So it will be in part 19. I will take a stab at morality and the elements, and give a like, click the bell, subscribe, and consider a donation for a starving philosopher. Have a nice day. See you in part 19.